everybody. Welcome to the Building Wise Families Podcast. I'm Alan, joined by my wife, Corey, and today we have Peggy Osborne with us again. She was on episode 4 talking about helping our kids identify their emotions and knowing what to do with them. So go check that one out. And today we're going to be talking about routines with Peggy. So Peggy's been in the field of education for 25 years in the classroom and also as an administrator. She's married to Dr. Chris Osborne, former pastor and now professor at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. She's got 2 children, 5 grandchildren. She founded You Are My Treasure with her daughter and her daughter-in-law, and they're consultants and speakers for women's events, parent workshops, and teacher trainings. And she is the occasional podcast guest.
Add that to your resume. So we started a new year. We're already into it, in the swing of things, and we all have big hopes about what the year will look like. So we've got some ideas about things we want to improve in different areas of life, family life included. We tend to need a plan to get there. You know, we hear that all of the time. So whether it's getting in bed on time and helping our kids stay in bed or getting all the chores finished, we often hear that the key to a smoothly running household is a good routine. So that's why we want to pick your brain on routines. We know you talk about this in your workshops, and I know I like routines. It helps me feel good just about what I get accomplished. It reduces the time I have to spend thinking about it, making decisions, figuring out what to do. But I also know that I'm super structured, and that's just my personality. And I know some people don't like to be boxed in. So we just wanted to start with the question of, are routines for everyone? Or is it just for people like me who like them a lot? And are they really that important? What's so great about routines?
Well, Corey, I really feel like that I can identify with you. I really like routines and I like order, but I'm not great at it. So I've kind of got that imbalance, I guess, going on. I function a whole lot better when my own life is on a routine, but sometimes doesn't come easy for me. I really have to plan if there's going to be a routine in a certain area of my life. I've really experienced it recently, having made this move. I was in very much of a routine, but moving to Fort Worth and having a very different role and being in a different place, my routines have been disrupted. And of course, COVID, has kind of thrown everybody into an odd routine. So would I say that they would benefit everybody? I would. And I often will say, do you want chaos or do you want peace? And I think pretty much everybody is going to choose, boy, I'd much rather have peace in my home than to have chaos. And a routine can very much provide that. When I was working with teachers, many times I would sit down with them and say, what is the time of day that you dread? And I would get various answers like getting everybody to, and this is preschool and kindergarten teachers, mainly preschool. And it would be, I dread the end of the day, when we're trying to get everybody packed up and ready to go home. Or I dread nap time, when we're trying to get everybody to rest and all the children are pulling at me. Or I had one particular teacher who said that she never wanted to ever let the children play with the blocks again, because it was such a disaster to clean up. So, by the way, her solution was just to close the block center. I mean, she just closed it and the kids weren't using it anymore. And so we had to do something to help her to feel better about the block center so the kids could be, benefiting from that.
I can identify with that. I tend to just say, you know what, this isn't working. Let's just stop. We'll just stop blocks altogether.
Yes, exactly. Especially when the child is standing there, young children will just pull them all off and then want to go play someplace else. And they don't get the whole idea of having to put them back up, So I completely get that as well. But routines are so integral to those situations. And I will ask the teachers this and say, okay, let's think about that time of the day. Let's think about the end of the day. Let's think about nap time. Let's think about cleanup. And it might just be one particular area like the block center or the home center that they're really having issues with. And 9 times out of 10, the problem is that there's no routine. And so, or maybe the routine is in the teacher's head, but it's never been taught to the children. So that's how we start a lot of time in a classroom. And I tell parents the same thing. If you've got a particular time of the day that you dread approaching, it's probably because you've never established a routine, or it's in your head and it's never been really taught to the children. But when you do decide to do that, when you think through, what do I want this to look like? I will tell the teachers and parents, I want you to have a fantasy. If you could have your fantasy, at mealtime or at nap time or at bedtime, what would it look like? I tell them to really think it through, and then whatever that fantasy is, write it down. And then now you have something you can teach. But a lot of times it's just not even thought through. So would I say that routines are good for everybody? I really would, because I think they're good for children. Even those children who are more like me, who aren't good at it, I function much better if somebody puts me on a routine. I can get in there and I can go step by step by step. I might not be able to be that great at creating it, but once I get it established, I function so much better that way. Let me give you one other example that I want to be sure and say, and that is that there really is some brain science that goes with this. The easiest thing for me to tell you or kind of give you as an example would be a young child who's going to school for the first time. And think about any age, really. It could be a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old. It could be a 10th grader, going in. When that child goes in the first few days, they have no idea what to expect from that teacher. And they go in and they've got this little backpack and they've got their lunch. And they're walking into this classroom that they don't know anything at all about. And so I tell the teachers, whatever, of course you're going to have some curriculum going, but you really need to establish your routines and practice them over the first few weeks. And the reason for that is when a child goes in, their right brain is completely activated with, what do I do? What do I do next? What do I do? Am I supposed to, because the teacher is saying, come over here and hang your backpack up. Then you come to your table and we have table time. Then, and then they're finished with table time and there's some sort of signal. And now they're moving to the carpet, or they're moving to lunch or a snack or outside. And that right side of the brain, that's what they're engaged with, is what's the next thing in my routine? After they've done that for a while, and that if it's a good teacher, she's got a well-established routine. Pretty soon, the child comes in and goes over and hangs up their backpack, puts their lunch a special place, goes to that table, sits down, knows that next transition is going to be to the rug to have circle time. And it begins to be automatic. This is what I'm going to do. Well, guess what? Now that is shifted. It's stored on the left side of the brain, and you don't have to think about it anymore.
And it seems like now the brain's ready to learn.
There you go. That's exactly what the next thing I was going to say, is that now that part has been learned, and you're going through, you've got this nice orderly way of doing things. And now when the teacher has something brand new and different on the table, or is going to introduce a brand new book with some fun things to do at rug time, the child isn't having to think, how do I sit? What do I do? What's going to come next? Now all of that is stored and it's automatic, and they're opened up. And if I were to transfer that, I know you do homeschooling. But whether you do homeschooling or not, if the child knows this is the way we're going to do things in the morning, then they can get up and they can get it done. And they're not having to think about what comes next. And it's going to open them up for that day's lessons at home, or it's going to, as they're on the way to school, they're going to know when they get there, okay, I had a good, peaceful morning, and now I'm ready to come into this school and take it to the next step up. So it's really kind of a neat thing to see the way the brain works on that if you can get that automatic going, some of these automatic things going, it's going to bring so much more calm and order to the home.
Yeah. So routines are not just convenient for us to feel better about a peaceful home, but it's peaceful for our kids so that they can function better. They can learn better, whether it's going to school, doing school at home, or even with the littlest ones not in school, that they feel secure, safe, ready to do the things for the day.
Exactly. And even though young infants and toddlers can't tell time, they do know the order. And they can feel, oh, it's time for me to go to bed. Oh, it's time for me to have a bottle. Oh, it's time for playtime now. And if the same kinds of things, are happening, and I know the younger ones that have got older siblings, things can get disrupted. You're having to go to a ball practice or you're having to do whatever. But at home, the normal rhythms, it does help to establish that calm sense of peace, when they're there at home, that this is what I usually expect. And, I think we can talk to our little ones as well when there's going to be a change in the routine and help prepare them for that.
Yeah. And I love the practical step too of what feels chaotic to me, and start there by writing down what I want it to look like and then actually making a plan of how to make the routine.
Exactly. And you don't have to do them all at one time. Just tackle one at a time and think about it. And then the important thing is, don't just keep it in your head. We're going to begin to teach that to the kids as well.
So speaking of chaos, as parents, we've got bedtime routines. We've got morning routines, or we would like to have those things just because we want to get our kid to go to sleep, or we want to get out the door on time. We want to get chores done. So I know there's tons of parents that have the question, how do I start a bedtime routine? Like, how do I create a bedtime routine?
Well, once again, I think the beginning of it is to think, what do you want it to look like? And that sounds so simple, but it really does require some thought. Do you want there to be, when is the brushing of your teeth going to come in? And you got to make sure you've got that after your final snack. And are you going to put a little glass of water or a little bottle of water by the bed? And, you've got to think through what is going to fit for your home. So that's the first step is doing that. Also, don't just say, read books. I would say, how many do you plan to do in the evenings? And think about that, really hard, because if you say you're going to read 3 books and they want 4, or they want 5. And so, now there's nothing wrong with saying we're going to read 3 books tonight or read 2 books tonight. And then going in, you can say, hey, we have a little bit more time tonight, so I'm going to let you pick out an extra book tonight at our book time. But there's got to at least be a standard. And then, of course, there's going to be those nights that you're running late. And as my daughter Lauren used to say, it's going to be bath, Bible, bed. There's not going to be, that's what the routine's going to be tonight, is bath, Bible, bed, because it's late. And, she often would do books, like fun little books for children, and then always had their Bible time, but sometimes that gets cut out if you're really running late. But anyway, thinking about that, thinking through, what do I want it to look like? And then I would recommend is taking pictures of it with the child in the pictures. And I know this requires a little bit of time, but it's really good. If you've got several children, it's, either you're going to, if everybody's doing it exactly the same way, then you could put all 3 kids in the picture of them standing there holding their toothbrush, and brushing their teeth. But if you've got kids that are spaced out in age, you might have to do separate routines for them. But I would take a picture of them doing the routine, have a picture of them getting their snack, have a picture of them brushing their teeth, have a picture of them going potty and then washing their hands, having a picture of them in the bed reading books, and then have a picture all covered up, and, maybe you kissing them goodnight or whatever, and then the lights out. And I've seen this done a couple of different ways. I've seen one person who's done it on like a chart where, it's either a vertical chart or a horizontal chart. And I've seen the pictures on there, small pictures, and then a little clothespin, where the child can move that down as they accomplish things. As the kids get older, they may not even need to move the clothespin. They may just need to see it visually. Okay, I can check across and see that I've done all these things, and now it's time for me to go get in bed. So I've also seen it done in books, like a little, my bedtime ritual book or bedtime routine book, and where you read it to them during the day. But I still think it's nice to have something posted in their bathroom and then in the bedroom so they can actually see it visually. Because if it's way back over here in the living room in a book, they might not remember, but it sure is good to teach it by having it in a little book. And that just means taking the pictures and putting it into a little report folder, where they can actually read it. They love being the star, of the book. And this all sounds real involved, but it really is not that hard to put together. And the payoff is really high.
That's what I was just thinking, like making it so much smoother. It seems worth it to put a few minutes of taking pictures and printing them.
Right. Studies show that children up into the age of 8 learn much better through visuals and modeling practice than it is just to hear it auditorily. So if they can see it, it's just a lot better than saying it out loud. And plus it wears you out. You're saying, did you do this? Did you do that? And so it's a whole lot better to have them, you're in there and you're showing them what's next. Alan, you ask about teaching it. I think that that's how you start, is by thinking, what do I want? Getting your photographs made. And then you can't just send them off to do it. It has to be something that you actually stay right with them and you actually go through the steps for a period of time, depending on how young they are. If they're really young, you're going to be there right there with them for quite some time. If they're a little bit older, they can probably catch it pretty quickly, on exactly what it's going to look like. But you're actually going to be involved with them, teaching them and modeling that routine. And then the hard part comes, and that is you stick to it. You don't fudge. You actually say, we've got this routine. This is the way we're going to do things. And of course, there's going to be exceptions to the rule, like when it's late at night and you may have to cut something short, but then you prepare them ahead of time. Hey guys, when we get home tonight, our routine's going to be a little bit short. Bible bed. And we're going to hop in bed tonight. And they'll get used to that. They'll get used to the fact that sometimes it's going to change.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of a woman named Pam Barnhill who talks about homeschooling and your routine for the day, your schedule for what subjects you're going to do. She talks about a minimum viable day. So you've got your plan, but then if your day has, something that throws it off, you've got your, 2 or 3 or whatever things that it's like, if I complete this, then I've completed enough, a minimum viable day of my homeschool. So again, I think that probably lines up with what you were saying. Don't just keep that in your own head, though. Your kids also have to know this might be the default if we're running out of time. These will be the 2 or 3 things we do before bed.
Absolutely.
So are there other routines? We were asking about bedtime. That's a big one. Are there any other routines, morning time, anything else that you have some advice on that could help?
There really are. And I just, while you were talking, Corey, thought of one other thing about the bedtime routine. Let me share that with you real quickly. My daughter-in-law had twins, and she really struggled with bedtime with the little girl. The little boy pretty much got into the routine pretty quickly, and she had a cute little picture schedule up, and the picture schedule ended to begin with as one of the little girl was in her bed and the little boy was in his bed. Well, the little girl continued to struggle. She continued to scream and just struggle, and she just panicked every night. And she and I were brainstorming other ideas of what, maybe we could do. And I asked her finally, I said, Courtney, I know your picture schedule ends, which is where I would have ended it with them being in the bed. But do the children have any idea where you are, where you're going after you tell them goodnight? And she said, no, I don't think I've ever really talked to them about that. And I said, well, why don't you add some pictures? And she added a picture of her husband sitting at the computer, because usually he would go in and work on the computer, and a picture of her sitting in her bathrobe on the couch doing her work there on her computer. And she put those on the schedule, and she went over it during the day, with the children. Now, it did not help immediately, but within a week, it made a big difference. And I think it was because, if you put yourself in the place of a child, you've been with your parents all day long. Now, all of a sudden, you've gone through this routine, and now you're in a dark room by yourself, and you have no idea where mom and dad are. And by adding that picture to say, you're going to stay in here and go to bed. I'm going to be in the living room. Your daddy is going to be in the study. I think with just a very short period of time, it brought peace to her, to this little girl. And she began having easier nights. So that's one more thing just to think about.
Yeah, back to the routines providing safety, but then, taking it one step further, it wasn't just the routine that she needed, but she needed that extra little piece to help her feel secure at the end of the night.
Absolutely. So I didn't want us to go on without me at least mentioning that. So as far as other routines go, I think it's really kind of overwhelming. There are so many and you don't have to tackle them all. But if you have a certain one that's kind of driving you crazy or you feel like you need to hone in on, then do it. There's a morning routine, and you might have a morning routine Monday through Friday that looks different than your Saturday routine and your Sunday routine with going to church or just having a play day on Saturday or whatever. And so, you might want to have it visually Monday through Friday. This is what our routine looks like in the morning. And then depending on if you homeschool or you're getting kids ready to go out the door, it's going to look different because of the things they've got to pick up and, be ready to be in the car and all of that. And then Saturday may look very different. And Sunday is going to be different because you're going to get up, you're going to get dressed in a different way. You're going to be sure they have their Bible, going out the door. So certainly think about that too. If you're struggling in the morning, I think that would be an excellent way for you to make your morning more productive and calmer. As you're thinking about your day, you might be like the teacher with the blocks. Maybe cleanup routines are overwhelming. And a lot of times we say to a child, okay, it's time to go clean up your room. And that's real overwhelming to most young children. So if you have a routine that, okay, when I say clean up your room, this is what it looks like. You go to this shelf and you pick up the puzzles that all go on this shelf. Then you go to this area, your dolls, and you pick up the areas here. So in other words, you're going to have to walk through this with them to help them to see this is what the routine looks like. And I heard this one day, and I thought this was so smart. The parent had taken a picture of the shelf. This is what it looks like. When I say clean up your room, this shelf should look like this. The doll area should look this way. The book area should look this way. We've done it for children at school with their desk. You have kids that are just, it looks like a tornado has happened in their desk every day. So you take a picture of it and you say, when it's all neat, say, this is what it should look like, by the time you go to lunch or by the time you go out, so they can have a visual of what that's going to look like. So once again, you're giving them these visuals, taking pictures, walking them through what does this look like. Even simple things like brushing your teeth. What's the routine for brushing your teeth? What's the routine for taking a shower? We often had to remind our son that soap was required. He would come running in and be all wet, and we'd say, Stephen, did you use soap? And he'd run back in, to get in the tub again. You might have a cleanup routine from your meals, about putting your plate, something very simple, raking your plate, into the trash, putting it into the sink. You can build your chores, and things. See, a chore could even be a routine. When you're teaching the child how to clean up the bathroom or how to pick up toys or how to sweep underneath the breakfast table, those are simple day-to-day routines, but they need to be taught. So really, there's so many. There's nap time. Do you have a nap time routine? What about a potty routine? What do they do? When they go in, they go and they flush and they have to wash their hands and dry it and leave the towel a certain place or after the bath, they've got to hang their towel back up. There are so many little routines within routines that you definitely can build in as you need them during the day. If you really, a lot of times with children, you can't just say, go wash your hands. They think that just means kind of, rushing the water over their hands and running off, or drying them off on your pants and, going on, rather than really knowing the right things to do. And all of those come under the headline of routines.
That's so interesting. When I hear routine, I think of a long, drawn out process that has to be completed. But when we finish supper, our kids have a routine, which I wouldn't have called it a routine, but they say thank you. They ask if they can get up from the table, and they take their plate to the sink. So it's 3 steps. It's very simple. It's simple to teach. So it's not a long, drawn out process, but even that's a routine that they know what's expected. And so then it's on the left side of their brain. They're not having to think about it. They know exactly what to do.
Exactly. But it wasn't at first.
Correct.
At first, you all had to walk them through it. You had to tell them, this is what we expect, and, to walk them through it. And I think many times we just forget. I think you're right, Alan. A lot of it just comes naturally to us, and probably because both of y'all like routine and it comes more naturally to y'all. I think even about the way y'all do get up in the morning and you go for a walk, and then you come back in and you fix breakfast, you sit down after we have breakfast, you have a Bible time, with them. See, that's a routine. And the kids just automatically know this is what we're going to do in the morning. And it's very calming. And if you talk about the brain states with the frontal lobe, the emotional state and survival state, anytime you have routines, it provides security and a calming to this survival state, because the child knows what's going to come next. And if you have a really challenging child, they really thrive with routine. And you'd best prepare them if that routine's ever going to be changed, because that's when sometimes things fall apart. If you do have that strong-willed or, very set in their ways, strong, challenging child, you got to make sure, number one, it helps to have the routine, but it also can be, wow, it can start some fireworks if it's not done, the right way. So
that's really interesting. We've got a couple that are strong-willed in their own unique ways. And I would say one would probably lean more toward, it's visible if the routine is interrupted, the frustration there. Mm-hmm. But the other probably needs it just as much, but tends to maybe push back on some of the, do I have to do this?
Exactly.
But I would think that child would still benefit and, greatly benefit from the security of it, because part of that pushback is probably needing to just continue feeling safe.
Exactly. Kind of the boundaries. Where are the boundaries? Can I push back and get a little bit more than what I'm used to getting? And they need to have that security of thinking, no, this is the way we're going to do it. What the routine is. I certainly think when a child is learning a routine, there's going to be a lot of time spent walking them through it. You're kind of right there, especially when they're young. They're going to be, you can't expect them to get it exactly right. This is one of those things that you're their coach and you are coaching them through this. For example, if you were to teach them how to clean the bathroom, think about it. That's a routine. You're going to get the bathtub, you're going to get the toilet, you're going to get the sink. And once you've taught them that and you've been there with them, then eventually you begin to release them and you just go check.
It seems like most of us as parents would default to, I told you what to do, and now I'm frustrated that you're not doing it. So what's the right consequence to get you to do it? But you're kind of backing up and saying, we have a big role in when it's not going right or done timely. Have we really modeled for them? Have we taken the time? Because the picture you're painting is, it's a commitment of time, but it's worth it. The payoff will be worth it. But it does mean we have to be involved, and we need to not expect that after one time of showing them, they're just going to magically get it. So I think, backing up to what's our role in it, what might be going on in the kid. I'm thinking about this phrase that Connected Families uses sometimes called the just right challenge. Is this routine a just right routine or challenge for developmentally, or this kid, or where they're at? Do they feel safe enough to do this? And then there will be times when they don't do it. And then they might get an extra opportunity to practice that responsibility.
Exactly. And one of the things that people they have a hard time, teachers and parents have a hard time wrapping their mind around when they hear the word consequence. They immediately think of timeout or a spanking or, something like that. And very often we don't think that the consequence is practicing the skill. That really should be the first consequence to not getting it right. And not in a punitive way, just in a teaching way. It'd be like they didn't get 2 + 2 is 4. You wouldn't punish them. You wouldn't give them a spanking, for that. You would take them back and you'd get manipulatives and you'd teach it in a different way. And that's what we've got to wrap our minds around is we've got to do a series of teaching. And then what I call spotlighting, when they do it right. Look at this. There is not a ring on this tab at all. Or look at this. You came right in here. You've got your little clip and you have moved it along and you have gotten it all done on your own. Way to go. To really focus when they get it right instead of focusing on when they get it wrong.
That reminds me also of when we talked in episode 4 about when you are needing to correct, it doesn't do any good to come in shaming. And you're talking about the consequence can be practicing, and it doesn't have to be, okay, you didn't do that, so you get to practice again, in kind of a sarcastic tone, but we can just be gentle with our tone, giving them an opportunity to practice again rather than trying to punish them and make it hurt so that they don't do it again.
Exactly. And, I was thinking about y'all's little Bible time at breakfast. This is kind of for you too, because you were talking about the intensity of your toothbrushing ritual. I think we can get too intense sometimes. Like, for example, the Bible time is precious at your house. It's just a casual, great part of your morning. You have your breakfast and then you casually bring out your Bible and you read and you ask questions and the kids are engaged. And, it's a wonderful part of your day. Now, I think if you were to then say, okay, everybody's going to have a quiet time and this is what you're going to do in your quiet time. You're going to do it this way. You're going to read it. You're going to answer these questions. You're going to have your prayer time, whatever. And we're going to do it every day. And this is how you're going to have to do it at this time. I think that kind of thing can be hurtful. And I'm not saying that you don't provide a quiet, nice time during the day where you tell the children, this is a time to be quiet. You can, and give them options, of what to do. You can pull out your Bible and read it. You can have some quiet time of play. During this time, you can just daydream, or whatever. And certainly you're already building into the child that we're having Bible time early in the morning and probably again before they go to bed at night. But I think there's got to be some freedom of them learning how to speak to God and how to listen to God. So I think that's got to be a little bit more, what's the word? Casual? Not casual, because you definitely want to, you want it to be important to them, but maybe more organic. Maybe that's a better word, or authentic, rather than it being prescribed that you've got to get in there and you've got to do this routine. And, I think that can do more to turn off a child's heart rather than talk about being excited to see what God is going to say. And that whenever you want to, you can go in and you can read and you can see what God is going to say to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking, there's just this bigger purpose as we're giving them opportunities we're putting routines in place, but also giving them some freedom as they're growing, because this is for life. And so they're learning about character, obedience, flexibility, decision-making.
Like you said, the flexibility is important too, because we all know we have a routine established and ministry happens. That's been the story of my whole life, is to have a plan and then ministry happens where my plan has to be set to the side and I have to go forward and do the ministry. So yes, I think all of that is happening, but I also think just when you look at the big scope of the universe, we just see order. And I will testify to tell you that children in schools, I've seen classrooms that even for me to walk into them, were so messy. They were so overstimulated with, things everywhere and, paper everywhere. I don't think children function as well in that kind of environment as they do when things are in order. I don't want people to get all upset. They think, oh my gosh, my house is a little bit messy. I don't mean that, but I mean just sort of that overall picture that children are going to thrive and be able to think better and learn more when things are calmer and more orderly.
It's encouraging too that at the beginning you said this doesn't come naturally to you, even though you like it. So that's an encouragement to people that you don't have to be a naturally neat person, but you can, or orderly or structured, but all of us can learn some steps, and that it models, God's character, that we see his pattern in the Bible. I think too, just as you were talking, I was thinking about, we are blessed to be a blessing to others, not just to keep it to ourselves. And if I'm really stressed and in a state of chaos with something, I don't think about other people very well. I'm just thinking about myself, maybe that survival state. And I think I could see some routines helping me or my kids in the long run. It free us up to have eyes outward, to think about other people as well, how we can bless others when we're not just constantly in this state of chaos.
Exactly. And when you have little children underfoot, your house isn't going to be perfectly clean. You don't want it to be, because they're going to be playing and they're going to be busy and all of that. And that doesn't matter. That's good. It's just that when the time comes to do the pickup, you have a way to do it, and that you have a way to do the things that you do in the morning that are going to maybe make things flow more smoothly. That's the main thing, is that certainly it's okay. You might even be folding laundry on the couch and the kids all playing and the doorbell rings for somebody to come over. That's okay. People don't care about that kind of thing. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about order. We're talking about that when the laundry is folded, that it gets carried and put away. And there's just a way of doing things. It doesn't just stay that way. This is the way all homes function. There's a difference between children living in a normal, routines going on in the house where things are coming in and out, and it being consistently piled up, And so I think that we just need to remember that children overall, with the way they go through their day and also just their environment, like how to clean up their room. Certainly fine to have blocks everywhere, have Legos, different places. But when the time comes to pick up, they know, put my finished structure over here and we're going to get the rest of the Legos picked up. So you do it without stifling their creativity and the fun.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good reminder. Well, we will link to Peggy's Facebook group, Treasured. So don't forget to check that out. And Peggy has lots of great resources on her website, youaremytreasure.com, including there's a book called New Beginnings that we use as a routine. Again, I wouldn't have considered it a routine, but for conflict resolution. So check that out. And there's lots of other great resources there. We'll link to that as well in the show notes. So Peggy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
Well, one more thing about the New Beginnings, just thinking about how you talked about pictures. It has little pictures in it. And, you know what to expect. And it doesn't mean that they can't add their own, things in there for apology or for making things right together. But it is a good way to teach this. And, you can tangibly turn the page. So we love that one. We'll link to that, like Alan said. Peggy, thank you so much for all of your insight on routines. It was just great to talk to you about that. And we loved having you again.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you all.